Howdy y'all, it's Cody from the Keepers of Nerdom. How you doing? I want to just give some random thoughts to having played now 2 games of Keyforge Grim Reminders and got a little bit of experience under the belt. I want to give some thoughts on the game. So let's just hit every faction really fast and we'll talk about game mechanics and go through. Star Alliance seems like a very much more defensive this time around. Saurians out? I think they are. Weird. Geistoids definitely focus on the haunting and making it happen like crazy, and it's quite the game mechanic. I will say that, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So yeah, that's their focal point. The Untamed are all over the place. I do get the sense, by the way, from just about every faction that if there's a haunted card in there, it's more around the kind of horror aspect, and we haven't seen that much in this game yet, and that's kind of interesting. Yeah, especially the Awakened Titan from the Brobnar. And Brobnar is just all about still the damage, but also there is like interaction with the haunted mechanic, and often to the benefit of you if you or your opponent's haunted. But then you get to the Unfathomable, and they often focus on messing up the haunting and controlling it. They really are. They're the discs re-realized again. So even though the discs aren't here, they're here. They're present. Mars, yeah, Mars still does abduction things and has some haunting. It's interesting. Like Scoop Up is here, and that's cool. Yeah, it's just a lot of the same old with them in a way. Trying to think what other factions that we saw. Man. Yeah, I don't think we saw Saurians. Oh, Inquidon. They're up to their same shenanigans about we're going to make a deal. And so if you're haunted, then they do this extra thing and still have a negative penalty as well. They're still good because they're just, you have to be very careful with them. I think that's all the factions because there should be 7, and I'm sorry if I forget one. Shadows isn't in it. We've talked about Untamed. It's just crazy to think, yeah, Shadows isn't in this, even though, I mean, it was made for them as a set, too. But the Geistoids just take not their place because the stealing mechanic is present in other cards, but just not with Shadows. Very strange. Yeah, cool. So let's talk about game mechanics. First off, one of the big game mechanics is discard a card. Bonus icon is now a thing. And so you can discard a card from your hand. And I realized immediately after we saw several enhancements happening, I'm like, okay, this deck type, like this set is going to have lots of discard, and it's going to be really strong in that regard. And then the reality really hit. Not only is this a discard style, it's going to be really fast, depending on the deck, obviously, but it's going to be a speed deck type just because you can clear out your hand over and over again. And you may not be getting rid of cards that you want to get rid of, but you will get rid of them, right? You can knock it down to crazy low amounts in your hand and refill almost to completely back to from 0 to 6 cards because you could just get rid of everything. And you have to be careful now because there's that interesting choice, and they really force you into that mindset of be careful, you do this, it has a cost. It's an interesting thing that's similar to the last set as well, of this whole idea of, hey, if you want to make a token creature, you may be missing out on the card underneath, and you need that card. Whereas this one just going, you can discard this stuff to clear out your hand, but you may not be able to play it in the future when you need it. Now, that being said, the one other side of this is the haunting game mechanic of that, where the discard just loves the idea of, like, haunting just loves the idea of a discard. Just does. Like, get rid of it. Go. Fantastic craziness there. The other mechanic that was quite often was scrap. So instead of playing a card down, you could just scrap it out of your hand and get a benefit. Usually, I don't think we ever used it. Maybe once? Maybe. Maybe it was once. I don't know. That I saw it used in our 2 games, and it just wasn't a mechanic that we relied on heavily because the benefit isn't usually very good compared to lay down a creature and get the creature for turns in the future. So it's cool that it's there, right? Like, there's a benefit to getting rid of cards in your hand, and it doesn't just result in a net loss. I appreciate that. Another game mechanic that did show up a bit was Treachery, I believe it was called. And they explain it because even though they gave, that was an interesting thing, each of the decks had a cheat sheet in it saying here's the common phrases that you need to be aware of like assault and hazardous and poison, skirmish, da 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 da, and the new thing of haunting and scrap. But they didn't include treachery. It has explanation on the cards that do it, but the card will go into control of your opponent when you play it. Very, very interesting, because it's often this idea of we're giving this to you to create some sort of negative impact on your board. Very cool. I like that interaction. It's good, right? Oh, and there's a lot of, especially in Mars, like, we're going to take your artifacts as well. That's an interesting thing now, too, that they can abduct artifacts, and I appreciate that. That makes Mars even more versatile and controlling in the game. Dangerous. And Purge now has some extra interactions because they're still out of the game permanently, but there's cards that target that use. That it what was it? It's a card with the blue ghosts on them, and one of those, and it's Hallowed Memory or something, I don't know. But you purge cards from your hand, and then you draw back up to that from your discard pile. Like, you can grab stuff from your discard pile, and it's an artifact that lets you then throw it, destroy it, so you can get it back to do it again, because it's a play effect. And what's interesting about that is... crud. No, that wasn't it. It was a different card. But anyway, there is an artifact card that goes, you're haunted based on typically 10 cards in your discard pile or more. But when this artifact's out, it goes, you can count your purge cards and your discard pile as your count for haunting. So if you have 3 cards purged, you can add them to whatever you have in your discard pile, so it makes it even easier. And that card was just crazy if you had the right stuff. And then there was cards like Boo for the Geistoids that just instantly discards 10 cards from your deck. It's like instant haunting. Crazy. So the Geistoids really rely on, we want to be haunted. Makes sense. So the haunting mechanic is, like 10 cards or more in your discard pile and you're haunted. Okay, really simple there. Nothing too complicated there. The idea of it is you gain some sort of benefit that if you are haunted, you get to do this, otherwise do this. I appreciate that, right? It's not really a choice on your end as far as the card itself, but like you can control when your haunting goes off if you don't want to be haunted yet and get the other benefit. That being said, once you're haunted, sometimes some decks, they stay haunted for a long time. Not because you're not discarding cards, but yet because of how the cards function to get cards back to your hand or do something interestingly off on where cards go, or even putting them back in the deck. Very interesting stuff. Haunting, here's the big side note, not issue, but it's for such a powerful game mechanic, it's really easy to achieve, and it is very beneficial. And then it is funny that the Unfathomable have more like negatives. If your opponent is haunted, we do this instead, like they get stronger. So it's kind of interesting that they work against the haunting, and I do appreciate that. That makes me like them better, this set. So they're not just full on dis, but at the same time, they just still feel like the control, although Mars is kind of jumping up there as well. And I appreciate that their roles are kind of adjusting a little bit as the sets go. It's just like last set, the Unfathomable just totally took the place of the dis. That they're the control deck type that just messes with everything. So yeah, I think the haunting mechanic is really strong, like really strong. And especially with a souped up deck, like, a high rated one, it's going to be insane the shenanigans you can do, especially against older decks, because they won't interact with the haunting like you will. So they won't gain benefits or debuff you based on your haunting. And that's fascinating, because an older deck can still battle against this new deck type, but it's going to struggle in a way because it cannot address, if you're a deck that's really fast and loves to be haunted and can get the haunting turn 1, turn 2, it won't be able to address that's happening and stop it from happening. It's just going to have to do everything else in the game. And I'm really curious to see, because our first 2 games were against Grim Reminders versus Grim Reminders decks. We just wanted to see it inside of its set first and play our new decks because we were excited. That was tough to see and try to really understand how they're going to interact with other deck types. But I think that's the beauty of Keyforge too. Every deck from Gen 1 on can play with each other, and I love that. Like, our Gen 1s are still viable as long as they're high enough rated for that rating of a deck battle. They're viable. You know, if you're playing 70%, you can play us against a 70%. It may not go how you expect because sometimes they answer certain things that your deck does or vice versa. But the haunting mechanic, I'm afraid, is going to put a whole nother ceiling cap on the game. And that's going to just blow the other ceiling of the game out of the water. That's my thoughts on it. And I love the game mechanic. It's fun. I wasn't sure what I would think of the Geistoids and the haunting stuff. And it is so much fun. Because they have some really strong cards that interact with it. Like, yeah, some of the taunt minions for Geistoids. Whew, like, they're 3 power and they have elusive, but if you're haunted, they get +6 power. So a 9 power taunter for just being haunted, that's ridiculous. And then on the other side, like the Unfathomable do have one that's like, if you're haunted, it's a little fish, it's a 1/4. He gets +2 power, so he's a 3 with 4 armor and poison. All of a sudden, you know, this little 3 power thing is destroying whatever it wants and might go down. And I believe it has taunt too, yeah. So it's at least a 1/4, so there's at least 4 armor to get through before it will go down, but it's not gonna hit very hard. But then 3 power, cool, still not good at all, plus poison. Aha. Yeah, poison is the key there. It's just really neat game mechanics there. So have you gotten your Grim Reminder stuff yet? If not, why not? What's going on? Is it just slow? Or if you have, what have you experienced? What do you think of the haunting mechanic and the other things in the game? Did I miss a faction? I feel like I did, but I can't remember who it is. And yeah, that's my experience with Keyforge, with Grim Reminders. And like, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much for joining us today, or joining me. And, you know, as you saw, please do say a thank you to Taylor for letting us experience opening his Grim Reminders packs, because it was a beautiful thing to see and really cool, this new set. Like, share, and subscribe as well, and thank you so much. Bye, y'all.